Hi everybody, it's Miss Karen, the Young Adult Librarian at the Goshen Public Library. I'm back again with our final edition of Fairytale Friday's Tales Twice Told. And this week we'll be reading the original version of The Little Mermaid, written by Hans Christian Andersen, and another mermaid story from a Native American tradition. So let's get started with our Little Mermaid story, which we'll be reading from this book, Mermaid Tales from Around the World. Once upon a time, far out to sea, where the water was as blue as the petals of the loveliest cornflower, lived the Mer King. Since the Mer King's wife was dead, his old mother kept house for him and his 6 daughters. His youngest daughter was very quiet and thoughtful, and nothing pleased her more than hearing her grandmother tell stories about the far-off world of humans, about ships and towns and people. As soon as you are 15, her grandmother said, you may rise to the surface of the sea and sit on the rocks and watch the ships sail by. One by one, the sisters turned 15, until at last it was the Little Mermaid's turn. Her grandmother put a wreath of white lilies and pearls on her head. The mermaid said goodbye, and she floated up through the water as lightly as a bubble. When she came to the surface of the sea, the Little Mermaid saw the evening stars shining in the pink sky. A 3-masted ship was anchored in the water. There was singing and dancing on board, and as the night grew darker, hundreds of lanterns lit the deck. The Little Mermaid swam about the ship, peeking in all of the portholes. Every time she rose with the waves, she saw a crowd of people dancing. They were elegant and well-dressed, but the most striking of all was a young prince. He could not have been more than 16. How handsome he was, shaking hands with all the guests, laughing and smiling while beautiful music filled the night. But as the Little Mermaid watched the prince, a sudden storm swept over the sea. The waves rose like mountains. The ship creaked and cracked. Water came rushing into the hold. Just as the ship broke in two, the prince fell into the deepest part of the sea. The Little Mermaid swam through the dangerous waves until she reached the prince. She held his head above the water to keep him from drowning. At dawn, she carried him into a bay and laid him on the sand. Then she sang to him in her lovely voice. When she heard people coming, she hid behind some rocks. A young girl appeared. She woke up the prince, and he smiled gratefully at her. He did not turn and smile at the Little Mermaid, though, for he had no idea that she was the one who had saved him and sung to him. Soon others came to help the prince, and he was carried away from the shore. Thereafter, many evenings and many mornings, the Little Mermaid returned to the shore where she had left the prince. She saw the fruit ripen on the trees. She saw the snow melt on the high mountains, but she never saw the handsome prince. At last she told the story to her sisters, and one of them showed her the palace where the prince lived. Thereafter, night after night, the Little Mermaid rose to the surface of the water and watched the gleaming palace. She even pulled herself up the marble steps so she could gaze at the prince, standing on his balcony in the moonlight. The more she visited the palace, the closer the Little Mermaid felt to humans, and she longed to be one of them. Do humans live forever? She asked her grandmother. No, said the old lady, their lives are much shorter than ours. We live for 300 years, but when our lives come to an end, we turn to foam upon the water. But a human has a soul, which lives on after the body dies. It flies up through the sky to the stars. Oh, breathed the Little Mermaid, how can I get a human soul? Well, if a human being loved you dearly and married you, you could get one, the grandmother said. But that will never happen. The very thing that is so beautiful in the sea, your mermaid tail, is ugly to humans. The Little Mermaid looked sadly at her tail. As time passed, the Little Mermaid could not forget her prince. One day she was filled with such longing that she made a terrible decision. I will call on the sea witch, she said. She had always been afraid of the terrible witch, but now it didn't seem to matter. The sea witch's house lay deep in the eerie sea forest. Her trees and bushes had long slimy arms that writhed like worms. Her yard was filled with fat water snakes slithering about. The witch's house itself had been built from the bones of shipwrecked humans. I know what you want, the sea witch said to the mermaid before she had a chance to speak. You want to get rid of your fish's tail and have 2 walking stumps like humans have. You hope the prince will fall in love with you and you'll be able to marry him and get a human soul." She let out a hideous laugh that sent her snakes sprawling to the floor of the sea. "Well, I shall make a special potion for you," the witch went on. "Before the sun rises, you must carry it to the shore and drink it. Then your tail will divide into 2 parts. When those parts shrink into what humans call legs, the pain will be almost more than you can bear. Though you will glide more gracefully than any dancer, every step you take will be like treading on sharp knives. Are you willing to suffer this to be a human?" "Yes," said the Little Mermaid. "Remember, once you've taken a human shape, you can never be a mermaid again. Never be with your sisters or your father. If you fail to become the prince's wife, you won't be a human either. If he marries someone else, you will turn into foam the morning after his wedding. Are you still willing to drink the potion and risk your life?" "Yes," whispered the mermaid. "And one more thing," said the witch. "You have the loveliest voice in the sea. I want it for my payment." "But if you take my voice, what will I have?" the mermaid asked. "Your beauty, your graceful movements, your speaking eyes. Now give me your voice, and I'll give you the potion." "Oh dear, no," said the Little Mermaid. She was horrified at the thought of giving up her lovely voice. "All right then," said the hideous sea witch. "You will never become human." The Little Mermaid felt great despair. She didn't think she could bear to live if she didn't become human. "I will give up my voice if I must," she said sadly. So the witch cut off the mermaid's tongue. Then she gave her a vial of magic potion. The drink glowed like a glittering star. The Little Mermaid swam away from the horrible forest. When she saw her father's house, she felt as if her heart would break. She threw hundreds of kisses towards the palace. Then she rose up through the dark blue sea and swam to the prince's palace. In the moonlight, she made her way up the marble steps and drank the burning potion. A sword seemed to thrust itself through her body, and she fainted from the pain. At dawn, the Little Mermaid woke up. She felt the pain again. When she looked down at her fish's tail, she saw that it was gone. In its place were 2 beautiful white legs. She had no clothes on, so she wound her long hair around her body. When the Little Mermaid looked up, she saw the prince standing before her. His coal-black eyes stared intensely at her. "Who are you? Where have you come from?" he said. The mermaid looked at him softly yet sadly, for she could not speak. The prince took her hand and led her to the palace. The Little Mermaid was the fairest maid in all the kingdom, and the prince was enchanted by her. They rode together on horseback and climbed mountains together, and when they went to parties, the Little Mermaid danced as no one had ever danced, and everyone marveled at her graceful flowing movements. Sometimes at night the mermaid crept down to the sea, and she heard the mournful song of her sisters as they swam over the water. In the distance she saw her grandmother and her father stretching out their arms to her. Though the prince was very fond of the Little Mermaid, he often seemed distracted, as if he were thinking of someone else. One night he confided in her, "I'm in love with a girl I saw long ago. Once when I was shipwrecked and the waves carried me ashore, there was a young girl who found me and saved my life. She sang to me with her golden voice, a voice more beautiful than I've ever heard. I've never seen her since that day." The mermaid felt great despair. Since she could not speak, she could not tell the prince what had really happened, that it was she who had saved him and sung to him. Soon the mermaid heard a rumor that the prince was to be married to the daughter of a neighboring king. "I am obliged to make a sea journey to meet this princess," the prince told the Little Mermaid. "My mother and father have insisted, but if I cannot find that girl who saved my life on the shore, I would like to marry you, my silent orphan with the speaking eyes." And he kissed her. The prince and the mermaid journeyed together to the neighboring kingdom. In the moonlit night, the Little Mermaid sat by the ship's rail, gazing into the water. She thought she saw her father's palace and her grandmother's crown of pearls. Soon the ship sailed into the harbor of the neighboring king's city. Church bells rang and trumpets blared. The princess was brought to the ship. When the prince looked upon her, he cried out with great joy. "It's you," he said. "You are the one who saved me when I lay almost dead on the shore. My wish has come true." Indeed, it was the girl who had discovered the prince on the shore. But the little mermaid would never be able to tell the prince that she herself was the one who had saved him from drowning at sea. She felt as if her heart would break. The wedding ceremony was held immediately. The mermaid was dressed in silk and gold, and she held the bridal train. But she did not hear the festive music nor pay attention to the ceremony. This was her last day in the world. The prince's wedding would soon bring her death. Tomorrow she would turn to foam upon the sea. That evening the bride and bridegroom slept in a royal tent on the deck. The sails filled the breeze. The vessel flew swiftly over the shining sea. The little mermaid leaned her white arms on the rail and looked out the sea. Dawn would bring an end to her life. Suddenly she saw her sisters rising out of the water. They were as pale as ghosts, and their hair was cut off. One sister held up a knife. "We gave our hair to the witch in return for help," she said. "She gave us this knife. When the sun rises, you must plunge it into the prince's heart. When his blood splashes on your feet, you will have a tail again. You can join us below in the sea. Hurry! Either he dies or you die." The little mermaid took the knife and crept into the royal tent. She drew back the purple curtain and looked at the prince sleeping with his bride. She looked at the knife, then back at the prince. The knife quivered in her hand. Suddenly she rushed out of the tent and hurled it into the sea. The waves shone red as though they were made of blood. The little mermaid threw herself into the water. She saw lovely, transparent creatures floating above her. "You are one of us now," said one of the lovely creatures. "We are spirits of the air. We have no souls, but with good deeds we can win them. We fly to hot countries and send cool breezes to suffering people. We spread the fragrance of the flowers. Then after we serve people for 300 years, we are given a human soul." The little mermaid felt great joy as she raised her arms toward the sun and floated through the water into the air. She saw the prince and his bride on the deck of the ship. They seemed to be searching for her. Invisible to all, the little mermaid floated to the ship. She kissed the bride and smiled at the prince. Then she rose like a pink cloud high into the morning sky. The end. It's not quite like the Little Mermaid version that we all know from Disney. A little different ending to this one. Next, we're going to read a Native American version of a mermaid story. This one is called Menana of the Waterfall. Many ages ago, a little girl named Manana begged the Great Spirit to let her live among the stars. "You can only travel through the heavens if you give up your human body," said the Great Spirit. Menana agreed to give up her human body, so the Great Spirit allowed her to wander the sky. But soon Menana grew bored with the stars. "I want to go home now," she told the Great Spirit. "Oh, it is not that easy to become a human again," said the Great Spirit. But Menana begged and pleaded until finally the Great Spirit said, "I will let you be a human again, but first you must return to earth and live among the spirits of the flood, who will adopt you as their daughter. Then over time you will develop a human body." When Menana returned to earth, she lived beneath a great waterfall as a water spirit, and over time her spirit body did begin to change. First it became the body of a fish, then it began turning into the body of a girl. Finally, when Menana was more human than fish, the Great Spirit said, "Now you can go live among people. As you live among them, you will lose the rest of your fish body. However, you will not be completely human until you fall in love." Soon thereafter, the ancient head warrior of the Ottawa Nation stepped outside to look at the rising sun. To his great surprise, he found a little creature standing before him. She was half girl and half fish. Her hands and arms were covered with glittering fish scales, and in the place of legs she had a fish tail. "Who are you?" said the old man. "I am Menana of the Waterfall," she said. Without further questions, the warrior took Menana into his household and began treating her as if she were his own daughter. Though she was strange to look upon, he assumed she was a gift from the Great Spirit. In fact, all the Ottawas thought Menana was a wonderful gift. They loved to hear her laughter, for it was as lovely as the song of a sparrow. They loved to hear her stories, for they were as fantastic as moonlit dreams. They also admired the exquisite work she did with her hands. especially the robes she plaited with mulberry bark and the feathers of war eagles. As she lived and worked among the Ottawas, the scales fell from Menana's arms and hands, and her fishtail turned into a pair of human legs. Menana's spirit, however, remained as untamed as any creature of the sea. She passionately loved swimming in the rushing rivers and dancing in the torrents of the spring rains. More than anything, Menana liked to slip away from the company of the Ottawas and go down to the great waterfall in the forest. There she bathed and sang and talked to the invisible spirits who had once been her family. One day, when Menana returned home from the waterfall, she found a group of Adirondack warriors smoking a peace pipe with her adopted father. Menana's eyes rested upon a handsome young chief named Piskaret. He was the bravest warrior of the tribe. His arm was the arm of a strong man, his arrow aim was the aim of a stalwart man, and his heart was the heart of a good man. Menana stared straight at Piskaret without the slightest trace of fear in her eyes or the slightest blush to her cheeks. Then she walked straight up to him and said, "Tell me how I can win your love." Piskaret was immediately taken with her. "I already love you better than any other maiden in the world," he whispered in her ear. "Come, marry me and live with my people." Piskaret went on to paint the charms of his native land. As he described the tall oaks, thick glades, and winding rivers, Menana felt great love for him. She knew that she was now a complete human being, alive to all the joys, fears, and sorrows of human life. "I will marry you," she said to Piskaret. But the proud Adirondacks refused to sanction the marriage of the young couple. "We have heard strange stories about her," their leader told Piskaret. "We know her people are not truly human. They are the spirits of the flood." "Yes, they have drowned our warriors in the past," said another warrior. "And they have rushed into our villages and brought harm to our crops," said another. Piskaret begged to be allowed to marry Menana. "She herself has injured no one," he said. "Why must she be punished?" But the Adirondacks would not allow their hearts to bend with pity. They drove Menana away from the arms of her beloved. When Piskaret tried to run after her, they tied him up and bore him away from the Ottawa village. When the water spirits heard about what had happened, they vowed vengeance against the proud Adirondacks, who had brought their daughter Menana such sorrow. Thereafter a black cloud covered the land of the Adirondacks, and they began having many wars with other tribes. As for Menana, after she was separated from Piskaret, her eyes lost their lovely light. Like a bird of night, she wandered the dark forest, singing a sad song. She no longer joined the dance of the maidens, nor did she plait her beautiful robes. Menana spent more and more time sitting alone by the edge of the waterfall, telling her sad tale to the cascading waters, and listening to the waters speak soothing words back to her. One day, after spending an afternoon conversing with the waterfall, Menana rushed back to her village. Her friends were surprised to see such a happy look on her face. Smiling radiantly, she announced, "I'm going to leave human life now and return to the world of the water spirits." "Why?" everyone wanted to know. They all felt panic at the thought of losing Menana. "I cannot tell you," she said. "I can only say that I must leave now." Though everyone tried to talk her out of her decision, Menana would not change her mind. Finally, the Ottawas had no choice but to follow her in a large procession through the forest to the waterfall. No sooner had Menana reached the cascading waters than out of the swirling torrent rose a host of fallen spirits. They moved like ghosts through the air and welcomed Menana into the water. She gave one last wave to her Ottawa friends and then disappeared forever. Later that same afternoon, an Adirondack war party was canoeing down the river above the waterfall. The leader of the expedition was none other than Piskaret. When the war party was within bowshot of the waterfall, the surface of the water was covered with the apparition of grisly heads. The water spirits had assumed the disguise of warriors. They grinned hatefully at the Adirondacks and waved their spears. In the middle of the water spirits was Menana. When she saw Piskaret, her eyes shone with love. As the warrior ghosts began slaying the Adirondacks, Menana caught Piskaret in her arms. She shielded him from the sharp spears and pulled him out of the canoe and sank with him beneath the surface. The water spirits turned the slain Adirondack warriors into eagles and forced them to dwell forever on a misty island which stood below a raging waterfall. An eagle's sense of hearing is so refined that the roar of the torrents nearly drove all of them mad. As for Piscaret, since Menana could not marry him on earth, she turned him into a water spirit and married him beneath the wild cascading waters. So that's a little bit of a different twist on a mermaid story, where the warrior ends up coming under the water with our mermaid. So I hope you guys enjoyed all of our Tales Twice Told during this series and heard some new stories that you weren't familiar with, and maybe some old ones that you liked from the beginning. So I hope you guys have a great rest of the summer, and I will see you again soon.